Greetings, comic lovers, and welcome back to Casually Comics, the channel where we chat all things comics, reviews of comics new and old, to history to anecdotes, really wherever our whims take us. And today, an interview. We're going to be talking with Vernon Smith, the co-creator of Bigfoot Frankenstein, an all-ages horror adventure wherein a descendant of Frankenstein must go with his creation, a Bigfoot Frankenstein, to figure out who has been killing all of the Bigfeet. That's why he had parts to make a Bigfoot Frankenstein. Issue 1 will be coming out on September 29th, so almost October. Close enough. Halloweeny. And there will be a trade paperback coming if you're interested in waiting for it all at once. And of course, if you're interested in checking out Bigfoot Frankenstein, I will have some links for you down below. We're gonna chat a bunch of stuff. We're gonna talk about creating horror works for a younger audience. We're gonna talk evolving art styles. We're gonna talk self-publishing, Star Trek somehow, because it got there, and much more. So if you're interested in hearing about how this indie work evolved, then be sure to stay tuned. I'm Sasha, and that's enough preamble from me. Let's get to it. Greetings, comic lovers, and as you can see, we are once more doing something different. We are doing an interview, and we are here with Vernon Smith, who is the creator of a bunch of comics, but specifically today we're going to hit Bigfoot Frankenstein and a couple of other things. So to get into it, firstly, tell the people, what is Bigfoot Frankenstein?
It's the story of the great whole lot of greats grandson of Dr. Frankenstein, who's hiking through the woods one day, stumbles across a pile of dead Bigfeet, stitches parts of them together, harnesses the power of lightning, and creates a new best pal. So the two hit the road trying to figure out who's killing all the Bigfeet.
I have to say, I never thought about it, but that's the first time I've heard it conjugated as Bigfeet. I'm like, it makes perfect sense, but I've never thought about it. I guess I've never talked about multiple Bigfoot before, right, in a sense.
Yeah, I even get jammed up sometimes because I was like calling a shop to talk about it, and they're like, wait, so is it he just finds a pile of feet? And I'm like, no, it's like big feet or Bigfoots or Sasquatches or Sasquai. I don't know, whatever it is, a whole lot of Bigfoots.
So where did the idea come from to combine kind of and update the stories of Bigfoot and Frankenstein?
Well, it was from the writer, actually, like because I drew it and lettered it and am co-creator, I guess, because like I came up with the designs for it. But yeah, the writer for the book, Mark Bertolini, it's a guy that hit me up on Facebook, and we just kind of snowballed from there. So I don't know where he came up with it from, but whenever he pitched it to me, I was like, dude, sold. I'm all about this.
When it came to updating the design for like a Bigfoot or a combined Frankenfoot, how did you come up with that?
Well, I was wanting to keep it because it was like I was really tempted to just go all out on like what I could do with combining all the things, but then I was like, well, I don't want it to be too busy, so let's keep some stitching in there, of course, and and something to just kind of show that it is patchwork pieces. Like if you look at it kind of closely, you can see that one of his legs and feet are bigger than the other. So I'm like, all right, an actual literal Bigfoot. But then some things were sort of there at the beginning, and I can't recall if it was Mark's idea or mine, but if you look in like the first few pages, he has the neck bolts like a Frankenstein, but then that kind of just got phased out as I was going along. So some of it were things that, yeah, we did come up with, but then just sort of disappeared on like, oh, page 7, that's not there anymore. So there are a few inconsistencies in that regard.
So this book is aimed at a younger audience. So how do you find balancing the horror aspects of art when you're trying to aim it for potentially children?
I guess having read a lot of kind of all ages things, which is something I've always, like, I had a book that I did years ago, and I really wanted it to be like all ages, like to where kids could read it and like teenagers could and adults could too, kind of like cartoons that I grew up on, where it's like, yeah, you see these things and it's just kind of funny to watch, and then you like watch it again as an adult, and it's like, oh, he's making a pot joke. And so like things that are just kind of on multiple levels. And so with stuff like that, and with having a kid, it's like, all right, well, let me draw it in a way that I would be cool with, like my daughter reading and, like friends of mine's kids reading. So I guess like, being kind of older and either having kids or having friends with kids sort of gives you that perspective of what you'd be cool with them seeing. So you kind of know when to pull it back and not have like guts just ripped out all over the place. But if it's a bloody fight scene, just kind of show it from behind with like maybe the blood shooting out, or just like a fist with a little bit of something going on, to where it's not too graphic, but it gets the job done.
My daughter really liked it. I was rereading it just the other night to make sure that I was like brushed up on it. And she came beside me and she loved looking at the Bigfoot. She was like, it's so big. I'm a fan of all ages stuff for that reason as well, because then it's something you can do together, which is really fun. It makes it like a more fun experience.
I'd done a book, like one of the first thing that I actually professionally self-published through Diamond, like in 2007, just like called The Adventures of Dexter Breakfast, and it was like this little wombat cowboy and his talking dog sidekick. They're kind of cartoon characters but tossed into the old west. And I wanted, like I was saying earlier, like things that could kind of hit on multiple age levels, like influenced a lot by like Ninja Turtles or like Bone, like those kind of things where it just kind of hits across the spectrum of who could read it and who would get things out of it.
I saw also that you've done some like hard horror work, like with your series Hide. So what's that one about?
That is definitely a very graphic novel. It's the story of one day everyone over the age of 18 wakes up and just wants to murder the hell out of everyone under the age of 18. And that I came up with like not long after having a kid, but not because I wanted to kill her, but because like the most horrific thing I could think of was something like that happening. And it's like I would see horror movies or even like police chase scenes in movies and would always think like, if there was like a car chase scene and they're driving through like an outdoor like restaurant or something like that, and driving up on the sidewalk and driving through tables and stuff, people getting out of the way, or even just like cars being smashed on the highway. I'm always like, well, what if there's like a kid in a baby seat in the back like that? Like I don't know, just like think about those kind of or things where there's like murder horror movies and there was never like kids there. Like it just always happened to only be late teens and up getting involved in these situations. And so I was like, what would it be like if it was flipped and there was like kids involved? And it just to me was like the most horrific thing. And I was like, well, that's kind of good to write a story where it does kind of hit you in like this, oh God, like uncomfortableness. That's where that came from.
No, it definitely changes your perspective, having kids. Like there's a comic that I really love, Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. And reading it from before and then after I had kids, like reading the squee parts were so hard. I was like, I just felt so like the terribleness I already felt was like ramped up. I was like, oh no, this poor child.
God, and I haven't read that since before I had kids, so I'd have to go back and give it a reread
afterwards. So are you a big fan of the horror genre?
I'm not one of these like super horror people, because I have friends that are, and I'm like, okay, I mean, I like that stuff, but there's also just like the part of me that always does kind of click it into that real world, like, oh my God, these people are getting murdered. Like that's like where the sensitive part of me like kicks in. I'm like, God, these are just horrific things that are happening. Like I don't know why my brain can't wrap around like, dude, it's just a movie, chill. So like I do like them, but I do kind of overanalyze them and put them into real world things, like even just things like The Purge. Like even though that's just like a regular kind of not really horror movie, I think of it as like, God, if that was really happening, that would just, the stress of the days leading up to that would, like, you'd be vomiting, every day for months, because you're going to possibly get murdered one day a year. Like I like them all, but I don't know everything about every horror movie, and especially like all the indie, really deep B movies and stuff like that.
Would you say though that there was anything like horror related that influenced the style, for example, for like Jude? Because like there have been so many, for example, like depictions of Frankenstein like throughout the ages. So like what would you say was your inspiration for the character design for like Jude Frankenstein, that's kind of updated, more modern descendant Frankenstein?
I guess, I mean, I was, since he's kind of a late teens, early 20s, I was like, all right, well, someone who would be into all of that probably would be kind of goth looking. So that's why he's got like it kind of looks like eyeliner around his eyes. He's sort of got like the long emo one side kind of goth punk hairstyle that I had like a million years ago. Even like his lips, it's like, is he wearing like dark lipstick sort of thing? Like, and then dressing kind of steampunkish or, like 19th, early 20th century, like style of clothing with the baggy waisted pants and the suspenders and bow ties and stuff. So yeah, just kind of wanting to give him like sort of a steampunky thing to where how I would think someone that age, if they were like that now, would look.
I was definitely a fan of the goggles. I can see them behind you. Like I love that kind of like steampunk styling on things. The whole thing had a very fun vibe to it. I very much enjoyed it. Thanks. So what was your favorite part about working on it?
Just wanting to get to the next page. Like when Mark like pitched it to me and sent me the stuff, I was working on like a children's book at the time, and I think a Spanish to English teaching book that had like graphic novel pages in it, and all of that stuff was cool, and it was like the stuff that was paying the bills. But I was like, dude, this I want to get to it, and I want to draw it and then see what happens next, because there's you saw the first issue, but then like after that, it's like he fights the boogeyman with these giant wolf spiders, and then there's like these mutated hillbilly rednecks, and then like a big giant version of one of the mutated hillbilly rednecks, and just massive monster on monster fights. So yeah, just all of that was really cool. And plus, like, usually if I'm doing comics, like I write and draw them, so it's cool to work with someone else to be like, because if you're doing it all yourself, you're kind of playing to your own strengths of like, okay, I know how to draw this, so I'll kind of work that into the story. But when it's like someone else kind of pushing you or throwing other ideas at you, it's like it gets you back into that kind of challenge thing of like whenever I was first drawing. So yeah, that's just kind of all that stuff was what I was digging on drawing this.
So when you got into drawing, was the goal that you wanted to draw comic books, or were you aiming for something else?
This is pretty much what I've always done since like first grade. Like, yeah, I've got somewhere on my bookshelf too. I saw it the other day. It was like the first comic that I ever did, like in first grade. And then I was doing that again, like in the rest of elementary school and in high school, and then like getting into superhero comics and then indie comics. And so like my initial thing was like, all right, well, I want to draw for like Marvel and DC and gain a following and then go do my own indie book, or even before that, I was like, and then I could like pitch my ideas to them. And a friend of mine was like, you can just do your own stuff yourself. I was like, oh, okay. And he handed me this thing called the Cerebus Guide to Self-Publishing. And I was like, oh, I've heard of Cerebus from the Ninja Turtles. And then just, yeah, went super deep into like 80s, 90s, and early 2000s indie comics. And yeah, just kind of was like, all right, I can do this. Like, cause I came from like a kind of 90s punk rock scene growing up in, so it's like I knew all about the DIY stuff, and so I was like, oh, I can apply this to comics. All right, cool. So yeah, it was always the end goal was I just want to draw comics. Yeah,
I get a lot of questions like thrown my way about self-publishing and the like. So what advice would you give somebody who's looking to self-publish their work?
Have a good paying side job or or someone who loves you. Um yeah, because it's hard, and the kind of the most you can hope for is to get into the Diamond catalog, which that is basically like submitting to a publisher too, because they're not just like, oh, you have something cool, we'll put it in there. Like I learned that the hard way when I first got into doing this, because I made a book, I printed it up professionally, had like 2,000 copies, and I was like, they'll love it that I've got everything done, and they're like, nah, we're not interested. And I was like, awesome, I've got boxes of books to sell. But I guess just kind of do your homework on it, reach out to other indie publishers, or creators, and see what they're doing, what they've done. Because I started doing this like a little over 15 years ago, and there weren't all the resources, god, close to 20 years ago, and there weren't all the resources that there are now. But also just, go to any local comic shows like Comic Cons or store signings, like anything where there's local creators. Like most creators I've found, and this was even in the early days when I was getting into it, they're really cool about giving you tips and advice and saying what they do. And like nobody's really been like a jerk and we're like, whatever. Like, yeah, most people are really, really cool in this. For example, hit me up if you have any questions about anything. Like I know a bunch of stuff, whether it's like printing or publishing or, calling comic shops, any of that stuff. Yeah.
As you mentioned, like things have evolved and changed. What would you say is like the thing that's helped you the most? That's like an advent of like maybe a new technology or service or something that you find has been really helpful or changed the game in a way?
As far as like working on comics or putting them
Just
out?
in terms of self-publishing them.
Well, I mean, there's like print on demand comics are like a really good thing. Like Kablam, they're a really great printer out of Florida, and I've seen a couple other ones pop out, but Kablam's one that I've used a few times. And so that's just right there is something that's cool, because it's like you don't, like I said with that first comic that I did that got shot down, you can, if you want to print up 10 copies, you can print up 10 copies, and you just take them to, if you get a table at a local show, it's, it'll only cost you like 40-50 bucks to print up like a little stack of comics that you have. And so you're not sitting on inventory. I mean, YouTube videos where people are like saying what they've done, message boards, Facebook, Instagram. I mean, all the social media stuff has like really been helpful. And then even just the technology for working on things, like if you're drawing digitally, which I made the switch to a couple of years ago, and I love it. I don't have to have stacks of art supplies and stuff like that, and I can work on things wherever I want to. If I'm sitting in an airport going to a show, I can work on pages. It's kind of made the world a lot smaller, just all the technological advances, but it's also kind of flooded the market too, because then a lot of other people can do it, but things that aren't good will kind of get weeded out, or people that aren't dedicated enough to keep doing it, they'll kind of drop out. And if you just kind of consistently keep putting things out, that right there will really kind of give you an edge over other people, because a lot of people aren't, they don't put in the work, and that's the main thing with doing this stuff, is you got to put in the work, and you're not even going to have a choice if it's something that you want to do. Like friends, family, boyfriends, girlfriends, TV shows, games, shove all that aside. If you have a kid, teach it to cook for itself. Because you're doing this like average 8, 10, 12 hours a day, 5-6 days a week. So yeah, you got to put in the work.
What is it that keeps you passionate and that drive when it is so much work to keep producing it?
Combination of just having done it my whole life, so I don't really know what else to do. The love of doing it, like how I said with working with a writer, and you're kind of challenged to draw things that you might not have drawn before. That's another thing. And even just the selfish, loving the praise that you get, which might not be cool to say and people might not admit to it. But honestly, that's why so many of us get into doing this. I mean, any kind of creative thing, whether it's drawing, podcasting, being in a band, like anything that isn't just like I'm working in accounts receivable at some company, like anything that kind of puts you in any sort of spotlight. It's because I want the attention, I want the praise for the work that I do, or maybe it was because I got picked on in third grade, like whatever it is, it's like, and I'll show those kids now by being in a band. I mean, all that stuff. It's a constant motivation, and luckily those kind of outweigh the roadblocks that get in the way of any of those creative fields, because there's always things that'll either push you down, or even if it's a goal that you were expecting that you might not hit, that's like, oh, I thought I'd get like 5,000 orders of this comic book, or like, I thought I'd get 20,000 views on this video and only 100 people saw it, like whatever it is, like but then you got to remember the things that got you into this in the first place, and just kind of use that to keep going.
What would you say was the thing that drew you to comics at the start? Like, where did the love begin of it? Because you said you've been doing it for so long, since like the first grade.
Right. Initially it was, because I got into it by reading comic strips and things that would make me laugh and make my friends laugh. And I was like, I want to do that. Like, I like entertaining people, or like making them laugh, and seeing other people do that. I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. Like, just to kind of be, again, going back to I want to be liked sort of thing. I had that Ferris Bueller mentality of I want everyone in town to love me and be worried if I stay home sick from school. So yeah, it's definitely an ego thing, and again, also a creatively challenging thing. Like, oh, somebody did this, I want to be able to do that too, and I want to be able to do it better. And I want somebody to look at what I do and be like, oh, I want to be like that too. So it's kind of a self-feeding motivation, I guess. And then comics was just cool to do too, like seeing things that were drawn and seeing people tell a story through just drawings. Like if you just took away the word balloons and seeing like the sequential storytelling, and how if you read it like a storyboard, it's like, oh, I can still follow this. Like, just that kind of thing seemed really cool to me. And like how you could basically make a movie but without having to make a movie, like have all the production and all the people, you can just create it and control it all yourself.
You mentioned in that you like challenging yourself and like the constant kind of growth, that if you're not just, focusing on the same thing over and over again, you can really kind of better yourself as an artist. So what's an area that you still want to be challenged in? Like, what's something that you still find challenging?
Honestly, and it's a technical thing, is just perspective. I understand it conceptually, but when it comes to executing it, I'm like, I get all kind of jammed up on things. And it's like, if I look at an image that's similar to what I'm like, okay, I get that, but sometimes it doesn't click in my brain, but I'm pretty good at faking it. So that's something that challenges me, and just like I guess different things artistically. Like sometimes I'll be afraid to put too much like black or shadows, of just like solid black ink on things, because I'm like, well, I want to draw it to show it, but there are ways where you can basically fill the page with ink and it still sometimes shows it even better than if you did all the details. So just trying to come up with new ways that aren't completely shifting your style, but that just kind of enhance it.
So how would you say that your style has changed over time?
It mostly just changes depending on the type of story that I'm doing. Like I've done things that were more cartoonish, and which then gets into that whole challenging thing of like, oh well, I kind of want it to look like this, but I don't want it to look like this person drew it, like I mentioned with Bone, like I'd drawn more kind of realistic stuff before that, but I did kind of like the cartoony look of like Bone and Cerebus, like as of like the main figures and stuff. But then like with Hyde, it was kind of more realistic since it was in like a realistic kind of world. But then with Bigfoot Frankenstein, it's kind of a combination of the two, so you don't want to over render it to where it looks like hyper realistic. So yeah, I guess my styles mostly just change depending on what I'm working.
It's malleable.
Yeah.
I have to ask, because I've been staring at it the whole time, the Star Trek poster.
Oh yeah, there's if I turn the camera, there's a bunch more all around the studio here.
Which series is your favorite?
I guess favorite would be the original series movies, from like Wrath of Khan to Undiscovered Country. But I mean, like as a little kid, I watched the reruns of original series, and then like as a teenager was like when Next Gen came out, so that's like what I grew up on. And I didn't really catch Voyager and DS9 when they were airing, but I saw them like years later. And Voyager, like I really loved. I just wish they'd kind of push the story a little bit more. But like, yeah, like I think Kirk and Janeway are like my two favorite captains. DS9's not really, like I know a lot of people love it, and
DS9's my favorite one.
Oh yeah, I know, and I've got friends that are like, "Well, dude, if once it hits like season 4," and I'm like, "Season 4? Seriously?" But like I remember I did catch like the last season of DS9. Like I like the Dominion War stuff, and I love how it ended with like Cisco and the Prophets and stuff like that. Like that was really cool. And I'm digging Discovery. And I'm looking forward to Strange New Worlds, and Lower Decks is funny as hell. So like I'm an old Trekkie that's surprisingly loving the new stuff, and I'm like, dude, it's different. And I remember like as a like I said, I was a teenager when Next Gen came out, and people were like, "Oh, this isn't Star Trek. This is gonna be stupid." And I was kind of like that too, because I was like, "Oh, it's supposed to be Kirk, and why is this guy old? Who's the captain?" But now like everyone loves Picard. But so I'm cool with it being different. I mean, there are things that bug me, like the Klingons, and how come like the uniforms look like this, but I don't want to be it's not Star Trek. That's what old people my age were doing back then.
Do you find that you're able to maintain that with comics as well? Because like comics have shifted so much like through the years, and sometimes some of them have such different focuses than what they did even say like 10 years prior. So are you excited by like all of the new changes and stuff coming out, or do you sometimes find yourself in that get off my lawn kind of mode?
No, that's with comics, I'm totally cool with it. And that's something that I don't understand when a lot of comics fans see things like on TV or on movies, and they're like, that's not how it's supposed to be. And it's like, dude, comics aren't how they're supposed to be. They change because you have like different artists and different writers every few years. So it's like if you read any chunk of like Batman or Spider-Man from like a 10-year period, whether it's from the 60s to the 70s, 70s to the 80s, 80s to the 90s, we get it, decades, whatever. And like any chunk of time, it's not going to make sense as like a complete story. Like you'll have little story arcs here and there, but it's like comics as a whole don't make sense chronologically if you read it from like across the span of decades. So I don't mind when changes happen in comics, like and even when they adapt them to movies and TV shows, I'm like, I don't want the Watchmen movie to be just like the book, because I've read the book like 1,000 times. I want to see something different with it. Like, with Sin City, they did keep it exactly the same. And I was like, this is issue 3, page 17. I know this one. But yeah, I mean, like changing characters and stuff like that. I'm not one of these people that's like, well, no, I know they're not gay, so they're never supposed, like, it's like, dude, you can change, the world change characters, It's totally fine. I mean, yeah, you can come up with new ones too, but the world isn't how it was like 50, 60, 20 years ago when these things were out. So like if you don't want comics to die, you do have to change with the times. Otherwise you're just going to be a fossil, and comics are going to die out like people have been saying they've been for the past 30 years. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite comic era?
I mean, since I really got into it, like in the late 80s and early 90s, I mean, that to me as like a kid was kind of my big time into it. And then even when I got into indie comics later, it was all the stuff of like the 80s and 90s that really kind of influenced me too. So I guess that's kind of my main, and then that's also when things were kind of changing, like, you know, Watchmen, stuff like that, Dark Knight, like where it was like, oh my God, you can do this in comics. I didn't know you could say bad words and characters can die. And then like the Legion of Superheroes, like in the early 90s when they had like the first, I think 50 issues or so where it was like set in the future, and like, you know, they weren't teenagers, they were like in their 30s, and they didn't have like the costumes, they were just in like regular clothes, and the utopian galaxy had kind of broken down. Like that stuff to me was like really kind of cool. And yeah, and then I kind of fell off for a little while, and I kind of jump back into it every few years, like with just comics in general. And like right now I've just been reading a bunch of Star Trek, like Ninja Turtles, stuff like that. And I haven't really read too much superhero stuff probably in the past 10 years. But I've been loving all the superhero TV shows and movies and stuff. So I don't think I answered your question at all. But
I think you did.
Okay, cool.
But I want you, if possible, tell the people where they can get their hands on Bigfoot Frankenstein.
You can order it at any comic shop. It is in the Diamond Previews catalog. The first issue was in the July Previews catalog. The second issue is in the August catalog. But you can still order the first issue, even though it's from last month's catalog. And I think I might have some on my website. If not, I definitely will. But yeah, it's through Diamond. It's through any comic shop. The first issue is coming out like the beginning of October of 2021. And I know in the previews catalog, it's on page 239. It's from Action Lab Comics. I guess I should mention the publisher. People need to track it down. Yeah, if you just Google, actually, yeah, if you Google Bigfoot Frankenstein comic, Bigfoot Frankenstein Action Lab, or Bigfoot Frankenstein Vernon Smith, a ton of shops that carry the shop. Like you can, if you don't live near a local comic shop, you can order it from like, you know, bigger shops like Things from Another World, Forbidden Planet, stuff like that. And there's shops I've seen all around the world that are carrying this book that you can order from. So if you're in America, Canada, England, Germany, I think I've seen Italy and a couple other places. Yeah, you can get it anywhere that carries comic shops, that carries comics.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to talk about it and Star Trek. I'm always happy to talk about that with me.
Same here. Awesome. Thanks for having me on, dude. I love your show. Like I've watched a bunch of your episodes, and they're super cool.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time. Okay,
sure.
Bye.
Hi, hello, you made it. Welcome back. Thanks so much for watching and listening. Hopefully that was as interesting for you as it was for me. Again, I will have the links for Bigfoot Frankenstein down below. Tell me your favorite all ages horror work while you're down there too. And thanks so much for taking some time of your day to spend it discussing comics with me, or in this case, listening to discussions about comics. I always appreciate it, and please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit bell notifications so that you never miss a vid. And I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.